Hello, viewers from around the world. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the Academic Hive Research Bootcamp 2021. My name is Edin James. I'm a graduate student at the University of Calabar. Today, we'll talk about idea topic conceptualization. Under this subject, we will discuss writing the problem statement, formulating appropriate research questions, research originality and relevance, and all you should know about referencing, specifically how to use Google Scholar and Mendeley. At the end of this session, it is hoped that all participants should be able to master how to craft an ideal problem statement, formulate research questions suitable to their studies, avoid plagiarism, and improve the originality of their work. And finally, all participants should be able to do referencing easily with Google Scholar. Now, let's talk about writing the problem statement. What is a problem statement? As has been captured in this slide, a problem statement is a claim that outlines the problem addressed by a study. It is the rationale for conducting a study. It is why you are conducting a study. A good research problem should address an existing gap in knowledge in the field and lead to further research. Getting your problem statement wrong can be frustrating if you're looking forward to completing your research within a stipulated period of time. How exactly is one supposed to write a good research problem statement? At Academic Hive, we've identified 3 ways to write an effective problem statement. I'm not talking about perfect problem statement because perfect is unattainable, but good, or let me say better, effective is feasible. These steps are practical problem, which is real life observable scenarios. The practical problem is the one that you can easily relate with. It's a general problem that is revolving around your study area. The practical problem is general, it's what you can easily relate with. As has been captured here, practical problem is a real life observable scenario. We'll use an example to make this easy to understand later on. The next one is the empirical problem. The empirical problem has to do with the gaps that exist in existing studies. Studies have been conducted on your subject. The empirical problem allows you to identify the gaps within those studies. That is, areas where researchers have not studied on, areas that they've overlooked or that due to some limitations of the study, they could not cover them. So the empirical problem allows you to identify these areas and now use them to form a basis for the conduct of your study. The next one is the theoretical problem. Just as people have done studies on your subject, people have also applied theories to conduct those studies. So the theoretical problem allows you to check what people have done. What theories have they used to address that studies? What theories have they not used? So that you can now use the gaps identified to form a rationale for conducting your study. Now, if you're considering to publish your research or to apply for grants, it is most advisable to combine these 3 methods of statement of problem in your research. You can use them all together. Your statement of problem should contain the practical problem, the empirical problem, and the theoretical problem in order to give you an edge in the publication world. Now, how exactly is one supposed to write an ideal statement of problem? Not a perfect one, but one that effectively captures the rationale for embarking on your study. To do this, we have to consider a tentative research topic. So let's talk about motivation and employees' performance in the Nigerian banking industry. Motivation and employees' performance in the Nigerian banking industry. We want to see how the variable motivation influences employees' performance in the context of the Nigerian banking industry. So we'll start with the practical problem. Okay, the first paragraph of your statement of problem should naturally talk about a practical problem. as you can see here, it says employee motivation is a contentious issue in the Nigerian banking sector, especially as the prospects of job security decline for bank employees. This is a normal thing. It's a general problem. It's problems that you can easily relate with. In the Nigerian banking sector, the issue of job security is fluid because at any minute you may lose your job. Now, during the COVID-19 induced lockdown, thousands of bank employees were laid off without financial benefits, experienced salary cuts, or subjected to depressing work conditions as banks struggled to cope with increased demand for financial services. This was according to a newspaper article, Premium Times in Nigeria, that during the COVID-19 induced lockdown, banks laid off staff. That's also a practical problem. Now, under unfavorable working conditions, Nwosu, which is a newspaper article, decried that employees of some Nigerian banks seemed psychologically and physically unprepared to deliver satisfactory banking services, hence resulting in a surge in customers' complaints and overall dissatisfaction with banking institutions. As you can see, the practical problem is before us. We've said that employee motivation is a contentious issue in the banking industry of Nigeria. And this has been backed by a newspaper article that revealed that during the lockdown, banks were laying off staff in order to survive. And we've been able to tie that to performance. We've been able to correlate how that affects performance in the statement of problem. As you can see, Nwosu is saying that because of that situation, employees of banks are psychologically and physically unprepared to deliver the services needed. That's a practical problem. Now let's see what people have done on this subject. There's always something that someone has written about your subject. So let's check it out in the empirical problem. Okay. The second paragraph should contain your empirical problem. And it says that the potential consequences of employee ineffectiveness have led scholars to explore how motivational strategies could be used to significantly improve employees' morale and productivity, understanding their links with overall organizational performance. You cite those studies that have been conducted on the subject. I think I've cited 1, 2, 3, 4 studies. The next is you're trying to bring out the gap. Now we know that they've studied on that. What is that aspect that they have not touched on? What is that gap in the studies that they've conducted? That's where you bring it up. However, the vast majority of the studies done were in a non-African context. You cite those studies that are not in an African context, while a few studies done in Africa were in East and North African countries like Uganda, Kenya, and Tunisia. You cite those studies. Always remember to cite those studies. Now, I'm trying to bring out another gap. The scope of most existing studies also centered on case studies like manufacturing organizations, hospitality and tourism organizations, and telecommunications companies. Only a few studies were based on the banking sector. Now, what you've successfully been able to do is to look at what people have done and then identify what they have not done, as in get out the gaps that have been left by existing studies, and now use those gaps as a rationale or a basis for conducting your study. Now, here's how I'm going to put it. This reveals the need for a study that covers the subjects of motivation and employees' performance in the context of the banking industry of a developing West African country. Your study is focused on the developing West African country, specifically in the banking industry. The next is your theoretical problem. Here's where we see the theories people have done and the ones they've not done, and the gaps that exist for future studies. I said similarly, existing, now there's something I failed to talk about in the last problem. In order for you to effectively get an empirical problem out, you need to do a gap analysis. There's something called a gap analysis, where you review 10 to 15 studies or more than that that have been conducted on your subject area so that you can see what has been done and what has been found, and ultimately the gaps. So these gaps were gotten from a gap analysis that I conducted on some few studies on the subject. You need to do a gap analysis. The gap analysis also allows you to discover the theoretical problem. In the gap, you'll know which theories have been done and which studies don't have a theory, because not every study has a theory. Okay, let's proceed. The third paragraph talks about the theoretical problem. Similarly, existing studies have adopted theories such as the Herzberg two-factor theory and the McClellan need for achievement theory to examine the effect of motivation on employees' performance using qualitative research designs. However, in the context of manufacturing and hospitality firms. Again, studies have been done using theories, two-factor theory and McClellan need for achievement theory, using a qualitative approach. Remember, the approach you're considering in this study is a quantitative approach. So again, we've seen a gap that studies have been done, but they are qualitative in nature. And they focus not on my context, but in the context of manufacturing and hospitality. You always cite the studies. So there is therefore need for a quantitative study that uses both motivational theories to explore the cause and effect relationship between motivation and employees' performance, specifically in the context of the banking industry, in order to close the existing gaps. The present study, therefore, is conducted to specifically or critically examine the effect of motivation on employees' performance in the Nigerian banking industry. If you look at this statement or problem, it contains three types of research problems: the practical problem, the empirical problem, and the theoretical problem. A statement or problem like this is what you need for your publications or for a grant. However, the final say on the statement or problem is dependent on your supervisor. Your supervisor ultimately will determine whether or not it is suitable for what you're applying for. So don't be upset if your supervisor says, add this or take this out or structure it this way. It's all part of the process. Let's move on to the next thing. That's formulating appropriate research questions. Research questions are questions that your study is set out to provide answers to. It is a set of questions that you want to answer as a consequence of your study. To do this, you need to collect and analyze data. Good research questions should be narrow and specific. They should not be generalistic. A good research question should be narrow, specific, and should be narrow and specific. Also, to get a good research question, or to be able to craft out good research questions, first of all, those questions need to be investigative in nature. For qualitative or exploratory study, you can use words like what, why, how, explore, understand, discover. For quantitative or explanatory studies, you can use words like to what extent, determine, examine, investigate, ascertain. Also, you have to try as much as possible to avoid yes or no questions, such as is there, does, do. If you have to use them, that's if you have to use them at all, you have to include a qualifier. For instance, let me bring up a question from the statement of problem I just did. One of the variables of motivation is compensation. So I'm not going to ask a question that seeks to determine how compensation affects employees' performance. Down here, as you can see, it says, does compensation significantly affect? I just use the qualifier significantly. That's if you want to use does or do or is there, you have to use a qualifier, which is significantly. So the question says, does compensation significantly affect employees' performance in the Nigerian banking industry? That is a good statement or problem for a quantitative or explanatory study. Next, we'll talk about research originality and relevance. By definition, originality means it's your own. It's not copied. It's not cloned. It's not imitated. In order to be able to get an original or genuine study, you need to avoid plagiarism in all of its forms. You also need to cite sources in your study, in-text citations, that's in your study, and at the end of your study, and referencing. You also need to clearly critique studies and demonstrate your own unique approach or contribution to the study. Let me talk more about this. You don't just report studies. To add originality to your study, you have to critique studies intelligently. You don't just tell us that Mr. A conducted a study on this subject, used this methodology, found this, and recommended that. You're just merely reporting it. To criticize the study, you have to take an in-depth look at what the researcher has done. It can come off like this. Mr. A conducted a study on this and that, and used this methodology or this tool to collect and analyze data. However, Mr. A could have used this other methodology to provide a more in-depth or a more expansive or a more comprehensive look at the subject. Now you've been able to criticize the study. You've been able to not just report what has been done, but also point out what should have been done. That adds originality to your study. The next thing to do is understand your audience. One thing I see in most research is that they're not targeted at a particular audience. So the examples, the analogies, this explaining is generalistic. It doesn't really capture the attention of an audience. So to give originality to your study, you have to be able to identify your audience and your significance of study, and then write your work in such a way that it aligns with the needs and requirements of the audience. If you're talking about the banking sector of a particular region, your study should be tailored towards that region in some fashion to give it originality. Now, let's talk about something else. All you need to know about referencing. Referencing will be done it can be done using Google Scholar and Mendeley. But for this session, we will talk about how to do referencing using Google Scholar. As you can see, I've already done them manually. I've done this manually using the MLA format, Modern Language Association, the 8th edition of it. I've also done it using APA, the 7th edition of it. I've also done it using Harvard referencing. These are three of some of the most popular referencing formats in the world of research. As you can see, the MLA is different from the APA, as the APA is different from the Harvard. The APA usually is indented, okay, and the AND is different from the AND in MLA. The journals, the volume is different, it's not the same, though there are significant differences. This was done manually, but you can also do it using Google Scholar or Mendeley. Let me show you briefly how you can do it using Google Scholar. I would have to share my screen now, so you permit me to do that. Okay, I'm going to my browser now. Okay, it's open. The ID is scholar.google.com. You click on enter. It takes you to the environment of Google Scholar. This is what Google Scholar looks like. And since we're talking about motivation, you can quickly say motivation and employees' performance, and you search. It takes you to the article. This is the environment of Google Scholar. Google Scholar allows you to find authors, find studies, rank your search. You can get up-to-date materials using Google Scholar by coming down here and selecting the range of the studies you want to come up. For instance, since another important thing in research is to always use materials that are up to date, not 1990 or 1980, but materials that are up to date. You can come down here and say custom range. Let's look for studies between 2015 to 2021. And he says search. It's going to bring up studies within that range. Okay, we have a study in 2016, we have a study in 2016, and a study in 2017. If there were a study in 2020 or 2021, he would have brought it up. Maybe there's not been a study on this subject yet. So if you want to read the study, you can quickly click on it, and it's going to take you to a place that you can read this study or download it. Okay, it's open. You can see the study on effects of motivation on employees' performance in organizations. You can download this article here for your reading, or you can preview it before downloading it. You can see the topic, the abstract, the introduction. You can basically take all you need from this study. But this session is about referencing. So let me show you how you can reference smartly using Google Scholar. You have to come down to this parenthesis symbol and click on it. It'll show you a range of referencing formats. Okay, we have the MLA, we have the APA, Chicago, Harvard, and Vancouver. Anyone that applies to your research area, you can copy and paste. But since I come from marketing, we place a premium on APA. We do more of APA referencing. So I can click on APA, copy it, go to my Microsoft Word, paste it, and then I continue. That's all about Google referencing. However, you need to know the referencing pattern in your department or in your area of study. So when you copy from Google Scholar, for instance, you can preview before you send it. It's just common sense. Try to look at it again. You don't just rely on technology. Just look at it again in alignment with what you already know before you send it out. So that's all about Google referencing using Google Scholar. Let me take you back to what we were discussing previously. Okay, we're done with this. Let's move on to the next item. Okay, this brings us to the close of the session on idea topic conceptualization. I truly hope that participants at least have an in-depth understanding of how to conceptualize your statement or problem. Like we said, we have a practical problem, an empirical problem, and a theoretical problem. And we also talked about how to ask appropriate research questions using the how, why, and to what extent questions, always adding the qualifier significantly. Also, we talked about research originality, where we charged you with avoiding plagiarism in all of its forms by citing sources in text and at the end of your work. Also, identifying your audience and targeting your research, your analogy, your writing totally at them. Finally, we talked about referencing enabled by Google Scholar. Thank you so much for your attention. We will be meeting in the subsequent sessions.